This probably sounds a little ridiculous, but I found a box of clocks under my bed that I forgot about because the project they were originally intended for didn't end up happening. While they were under there though, they obviously stopped keeping time because either they weren't attached to a power source or the spring ran out of tick-tick-ticks. So I unpacked them, laid them out on a table, and proceeded to ask each one, "What are you and what would you like to be?" And, well, they didn't say anything. They're clocks. But also, if the definition of a clock is an object that keeps time, if it's no longer keeping time, can you still call it a clock? Is this a clock? Or is this a clock? To any sound-oriented person, I don't think I need to explain why I'd want to record a bunch of random clocks. They make sound, but I've never bothered to figure out how to turn any of my random recordings into a sample library before. And like a lot of things on this channel, I figured it was a great excuse to give it a try and learn from all the mistakes I'm probably gonna make. So if, like me, you've never attempted this process before, let me outline the basics. One of the big reasons I've never bothered attempting this process before is that I don't have anything near an optimal recording environment. I can't escape the noise, so the plan was to just do the best I can and then let the sounds dictate what they want to be, instead of trying and likely failing to enforce some sort of recording best practices that just isn't completely possible at the moment. What that looked like in practice is simultaneously recording with both a condenser mic and a contact mic, experimenting with attempting to dampen environmental noise, which admittedly wasn't particularly successful, and when confronted with capturing extremely quiet humming sounds, recording very late into the evening to work in the least noisy environment possible. So I have these clocks left, the old vintage plug-in clocks, and so they don't make a lot of noise on their own, but if you get real close, you can hear a little bit of a hum. So it is currently 1 a.m. in the morning, and it's the only time I'm quiet enough to give it a shot. So here we go. Shh, don't wake the neighbors. They'll be mad at me. For each clock, I grouped the two mics together in my timeline and then proceeded to listen and pick out the best and most interesting sections of sounds. Not everything was equally recorded by both mics, but where possible, I wanted to preserve the option to mix them together. I applied both general track and individual clip effects to try and clean up the audio as much as possible, and then additionally spent time playing with different EQ options to just create some interesting sounds. Because these are sounds from non-musical objects instead of actual known instruments, that allowed me the ability to transform them in a way I wouldn't be able to otherwise. And in the cases where I wasn't able to rid the file of enough background noise, I decided to try leaning into the noise instead of fighting it. For this project, I think it's fine, but like I suspected from the start, the next time I give this a try, I'm definitely going to look into creating a more soundproof space, in addition to probably needing to bite the bullet and purchase a quality shotgun mic. Also, even though a dozen or so clocks didn't strike me as being that many to record at one time, especially since I didn't have to record individual pitches and articulations for each one, once I got to the editing stage, it was a lot of files to go through. Especially since a lot of that time was deciding what this clock instrument thing I was making was supposed to sound like. If it's your first time out, I'd recommend sticking to either one instrument or one or two noise-making objects at a time. Once I organized and exported all the clips that I edited, it was time to start making the Kontakt files. There are quite a number of options if you want to go deep into the process, but for now, let me just give you a sort of quick start guide. Open Kontakt, open a new instrument, click on the wrench to see more options, and then the Mapping Editor button. Drag your recorded file onto the key you want to use as a trigger. If this were a normal pitched instrument, you'd want to record, at a minimum, a separate audio file for every few pitches, and then drag them to the corresponding keyboard pitch. In this case, since the clocks are closer to noises than specific pitches, although I certainly probably could go back and figure out more definitive pitches later, I usually just chose middle C. You can then drag the edges of that key mapping to either side in order to specify the transposition range of that audio file. Kontakt will automatically repitch that file to the correct interval from the key that you originally mapped. If the transposed pitches are playing back slower or faster than the original, selecting one of the time machine options from the source dropdown should fix the problem. But there's more there to experiment with if you don't like how that ends up sounding. Further down, there are several options to add effects to sculpt the sound even more. You can also add multiple overlapping files that are triggered by different velocity ranges. This would be great for articulations, but in this example, I chose to use both mic recordings at the same time, which I thought created an interesting sound variation. And finally, if you need to adjust your loop points, click on the Wave Editor tab and scroll down for those options. If you've ever edited a loop before, you should be able to figure this out. And once everything sounds how you want it, you can give it a name and save the file. And voila! Now I have an audio file that plays when I press a key, which, okay, this is where I get unnecessarily philosophical. There are practical reasons to make a sample library. If you have access to an instrument you don't play, you can sample it across a keyboard for easier use, or use it in alternative ways that otherwise wouldn't be possible. It's also an easier way to be able to share that instrument with others. Or, in the case of what I've done here, create a sort of noisy ambient environment to play around with in real time. But one of the reasons I haven't bothered with this before is because I usually can just do that straight into the timeline of the music I'm working on. So instead of just getting on with the actual writing of music, is this just a waste of time? I do think it's important for your brain and your creative, artistic side to try new things and new processes from time to time. Songwriters frequently talk about how important it is for them to just go out and live their lives so they have actual things to write about. For me, for the types of things that I do, a lot of it is skill building. The 3D printing, the instrument design, new recording techniques, even the process of scripting and shooting these videos. The nature of these skills is that you're probably not going to get it right the first time. So it's not necessarily a bad idea to get some of your bad takes out of the way if it's something you anticipate wanting or needing to do in the future. I think we all know how practicing works. But it reminds me of how people often talk about how writing music is a craft, the craft of composition, as if it were identical to building a table. If you just follow the right blueprint, often in the form of a $200 online course you can purchase, you too can achieve consistent, controllable outcomes every time. And if you just want a flat surface with 4 legs, then maybe that's true. It's a perfectly useful object, and honestly, sometimes you need to sell some furniture to pay your rent. Want sad music? Make it a minor key. Want exciting music? Write lots of fast notes. Need it jazzy? Add some ninth chords. Or how about a tritone substitution? Fancy. And the thing is, these statements aren't wrong. To a point, you can kind of plug and play your way to some pretty decent music. Depending on who you ask, Probably a lot better than a lot of stuff I've written. Particularly if you're in the beginning of your journey, almost the only way to learn is by following someone else's path. It's all built on the past decisions and actions of previous composers and musicians, just as your future is built on your own current actions. A huge part of this channel is showing me literally following blueprints in order to learn how to do something I've never done before. But remember, I also bought this off a random site on the internet, and while it's certainly a blueprint, it's not the only one out there. It gave me much needed measurements to work off of, but it certainly didn't tell me to do this. Whether that's an improvement or not, well, that not only depends on what your audience values, but also what you and your audience don't value. Because there's no such thing as universal perfection. You can practice and skill build until the cows come home, and you'll never get there. It's not a real destination. But also, I don't think I've ever cried about a table, no matter how beautiful the construction, no matter how intellectually stimulating the design. That table only has emotional meaning because of the home that it sits in, the taste of the meal set on top of it, the conversations that happen around it. Although, I admit, maybe I've never met the right table. But the other uncomfortable reason is that the time that is spent organizing and labeling and collecting objects of sound and function can be a distraction from the harder things that need to be done and the harder questions that should be asked. The ones with uncontrollable, unpredictable answers that just can't be willed up on command, no matter how many times you just show up and do the work, and for which other people can't always chart out for you. Deep down, what am I trying to do with music? What do I want to present to the world? Am I sure about that? Or am I voicing an acceptable cliche because I'm not comfortable with ambiguity? Can I talk about my music intelligently outside of the scope of music theory and my sweet, sweet chord progressions? Is there a way I can test the waters without spending a ton of time on this one technique? Can I work on this for another hour without punching the computer? Is it too weird? Is it too stupid? Do I even like it? Do I even know what it means to like something? Baby, don't hurt me. But what is love? Most importantly, can I identify what that feels like or looks like, and can I translate that back into music or sound? Can I transform it from this to this? Because not a lot of music exists without transformation of some kind. But also, in the end, do all of these things still fit on top of the table? And if they don't, now what? Music may not be a literal language, but it does communicate something, both to you and your audience. It doesn't have to be sad or angry. It can be fun, it can be playful, it can be anything you decide. And while I know it sounds like I'm advocating for overthinking every little decision you make, what I'm trying to say is that sometimes, every now and then, it's worth checking in and asking, do I really think this might be a valuable, transformable experience, or is it just procrastination and busy work because I'm waiting for someone else to hand me the answers? Predictably, yes. And let's be honest, everything between our beginning and our end is mostly valuable busy work, so kind of feels right that creating music would be the same way. Is it too weird? Is it too stupid? Do I even like it? Do I know what it means to like something? Baby, don't hurt me, but what is love? Okay, that's stupid.